in QU. This is Transfer Talk. Less than a month to go until the deadline, and Premier League teams are very busy. We've got updates from Chelsea, Arsenal, West Ham, Liverpool and more for you this hour. Conor Gallagher faces an uncertain future at Chelsea. Could he end up in Spain or at a Premier League rival? Emile Smith-Rowe should be confirmed as a Fulham player very soon. We'll have the latest on that and potential incomings at Arsenal to come. And West Ham are trying to sign a defender and a striker. Could Borussia Dortmund forward Nicholas Füllkrug be on his way to the capital? And with the Scottish Premiership returning this weekend, we'll be speaking live to the Celtic boss, Brendan Rodgers. Good afternoon to Dan Khan, Dan Bardell and Kwaku Afari. We are going to start with Chelsea, who are interested in signing Victor Osimhen from Napoli. Napoli are also negotiating a deal to sign Romelu Lukaku on a permanent transfer. Dan, Lukaku to Napoli, Osimhen the other way. It feels like it would work for both parties, both almost benefiting. But who's it more of a risk for, do you think?
I think it's a big thing for Chelsea that they're able to move Lukaku's wages off the books. I think, he's been on a couple of loans now. That move, although we all thought it was going to be brilliant and was going to propel Chelsea, it simply hasn't happened. Chelsea have had a lot of misfortune in terms of strikers that have come in and big money moves in the forward positions that haven't worked out. So to get Lukaku's wages off the books, I would say that's a plus point for Chelsea. The worrying thing would be that the deals are different. They're not mutually exclusive, but Osimhen coming in on a loan with probably an obligation to buy, you'd imagine that fee isn't going to be cheap. We don't know at the moment what that fee would be, but I'm imagining north of 70 million, let's say, for Victor Osimhen. So you're then taking on another big-name striker on big wages, and every transfer comes with risk. It would worry me that it feels like Chelsea have got a little bit of a free run at Osimhen at the moment. It's not feeling like there's anyone else really going for him. 12, 18 months ago, I'm not sure that would be the case. I don't think Chelsea would be lone front runners for this signing. I think other teams would be going in for him. So his stock has clearly gone down in the last 12 months. So I think it's one that comes with risk for Chelsea. But on the flip side of that, when he is at his best, he is a pure goal scorer, something that Chelsea have probably been crying out for ever since Diego Costa left. A lot of moves haven't worked out, as I mentioned before. So I think it's a good deal for Napoli because they're moving on a player that doesn't really want to be there. They're appeasing Antonio Conte and getting a player that he's desperate to work with, a player that he's had success with before. So I think it's lower risk for Napoli. I understand why Chelsea are doing it, but it feels like that number 9 shirt is just cursed.
Don't say that, Dan. It's not cursed. Kwaku, why do Chelsea want Victor Osimhen?
There are so many reasons why Chelsea would want Victor Osimhen. He's a player that, when it comes to strikers in world football, he's been on the edge of or tip of everybody's tongue for the last 3 or 4 years. And you can see that with the statistics over the last 4 years since he joined Napoli. He first came to my attention at Lille 5 years ago. He scored his first ever Champions League goal against Chelsea, ironically. And he's just improved year on year. You look at his first season, scored 10 league goals. Next season, 14. And then his breakout year, 22-23, where he scored 26 league goals in 32 games, was Napoli's best player and spearheaded them to a Scudetto title. And that's really when, like Dan touched on, he was front runner for all the top teams in terms of that top transfer that are going to take teams over the edge or over the top when it comes to strikers. Last season, he struggled a little bit when it came to consistency, availability and goals. He went to AFCON. He was a big part of the Nigeria team that made it all the way to the final of AFCON, but he only scored 1 goal in that competition, which was a bit of a disappointment for a striker that everybody was there to see, one of the biggest names at the competition. He did a lot of the hard running and the dirty work for Nigeria, but he failed to find consistent goal-scoring form. And that was the story of the season last year, as well as picking up a hamstring injury that kept him out for a month and a half. So Victor Osimhen didn't necessarily have his best season last year, and that's the reason why maybe there's not too many top teams that are looking to sign him. But if you look at Chelsea's options last season when it came to strikers, you see that a lot of the work was done by Nicholas Jackson. He was a man that led Chelsea in terms of strikers for goal scoring, 14 goals in 35 games, which is not a bad return for a striker playing his first season of Premier League football. A striker playing his second season of first-team football. Chelsea signed for Villarreal with not much expectation, and he managed to exceed it despite the fact that we saw some performances and we saw some misses of opportunities in big games that lingered in people's minds. He really found his feet towards the back end of the season, not only operated down the centre for Chelsea, but also operated out wide on the left-hand side. You look at Christopher Nkunku, a man that I was very excited to see. He played very well with Nicholas Jackson in pre-season, but got injured in pre-season and could never really regain his fitness. Came on towards the back end of the season, managed to score 3 league goals in 11 games. But Chelsea fans will be looking at him to really perform and deliver to his level at this season. And you look at Armando Broja, a player that came through Chelsea's academy. Similar story of a lot of Chelsea academy products. They're players that really haven't found their feet at Stamford Bridge. Armando Broja is a player that I really like, but again, at Chelsea, got injured. He was never the same after the ACL injury. Went on loan to Fulham at the back end of the season, and he's not really been the same player. I expect Chelsea to maybe cash in on him this summer. But for Chelsea, it's a very, very difficult situation because, like you say, Romelu Lukaku is still a Chelsea player. Victor Osimhen is a player they admire a lot. But in terms of finances and whether they can work that out this summer, it remains to be seen. We all know that Chelsea do need a focal point at striker this summer.
Yeah, and I think now, you know, if you like Nicholas Jackson, 14 goals in 35 games, Dan, which is really impressive. You've got Nkunku. Broja's currently still there. You've got Mudryk, you've got Sterling, you've got Palmer. How does Maresca fit all of these players in? What does he do? Is it now too many options in those attacking areas if Chelsea do get Osimhen? Because if Osimhen comes, surely Osimhen has to start.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Kwaku, that was some excellent analysis. And it's really interesting because Nicholas Jackson, I think, you know, we were all talking earlier, like, I actually think he was somewhat underrated last season. You know, he's still incredibly young and he clearly grew throughout last season. Actually, 14 goals in someone's first season, having only played a few seasons of top-flight football, I don't think is that bad of a return. But you mentioned in terms of the attacking options, is there too many? I think the simple answer has to be we don't know yet because there's still a lot of players who haven't returned from pre-season. You mentioned Cole Palmer and the like. But also when we've seen Chelsea in pre-season so far, Enzo Maresca's kind of gone with a 3-4-2-1. Reece James playing a bit in midfield. It's 18-year-old Mark Gui, who's 18 just from Barcelona. Is he going to have a big part to play this season? We'll wait and see. But we don't really know what the striker in Maresca's system, what role he's going to play. I mean, at Leicester, it's obviously quite a big comparison, but a lot of the times the strikers had to stay up, and they were basically poachers because the play would be around them and they needed to be ready to either finish off through a through ball or a one-on-one, or be in there to finish a low cross or something like that. So are there too many? I don't think we know yet, because we don't know what kind of the functioning of those attacking players are going to be just yet.
But that football sounds, sorry, Quaker, that football sounds ideal for Osimhen and Jackson, but you were saying earlier about playing Jackson on the left. In that system, that doesn't really work, does it?
He plays well off the left if he maybe starts centrally and drifts off over there during the game. But I look at Chelsea historically, and that's what I've got to hang on to at the moment, because Chelsea at the moment are not amazing. 04, 05, 05, 06, when Chelsea were their most dominant under Jose Mourinho, it was goals by a committee. Drogba wasn't the player that he became. It was Chelsea getting contribution from Damien Duff, Ian Robin, Didier Drogba as well. Obviously, Frank Lampard giving you a lot of goals. And what Chelsea have got to rely on right now is the fact that Cole Palmer gave Chelsea 22 league goals last season. People point to penalties. 9 of them are penalties, but 13 Premier League goals from open play in your first season playing first-team football really is something to behold. And Chelsea have got to remember that we have got Cole Palmer to come back into the side. And so I think that Chelsea will obviously rely on the striker to get them goals, but also have to remember that they've got other players in the side that can deliver goals on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Atletico Madrid remain in talks for Chelsea midfielder Conor Gallagher, but there is a big gap in valuation. Atletico do not yet have an agreement with the player, and they are aware of interest from Tottenham. Chelsea are expecting Tottenham to make a bid. Kwaku, he might not have sort of the stats that everyone looks at, you know, for a player that's played in his position, Conor Gallagher. But there was absolutely no doubt. Take Cole Palmer out of the equation last season, and he was one of Chelsea's best players. So why are the club wanting to sell him?
It doesn't make too much sense. I suppose you look at the books, you look at the fact that Chelsea have to balance the books. He's an academy product, and Chelsea can garner a hefty fee for him in terms of a transfer fee. But for me, he's such an important player, not just on the pitch, but what he brings off the pitch as well. Quickly develops into a leader at Stamford Bridge. Is a player that is strong in the dressing room and gives his all for Chelsea. And like you mentioned, it's not the top-line stats that stand out of Conor Gallagher. It's the underlying stats. It's the pressing, it's the running, it's the tackling. And he's a player that started the game for England at the Euros. Like, it beggars belief that a player that is an England international is surplus to requirements at a club like Chelsea that are not even challenging for Champions League football, really. And so for Chelsea fans, it would be a huge disappointment, especially over the last couple of years, seeing big academy products leave the club. Conor Gallagher is a man that, I've mentioned it before, wore the captain's armband more than anybody else for Chelsea last season. And so he will be a big miss. And he was a huge plus for Mikel Pochettino last year, especially when Chelsea turned things around towards the back end of the season. And so it remains to be seen how Chelsea will do without Conor Gallagher. But again, I've said it before, he's going to be a big, big miss for the club.
Yeah, he's of course entering into the last year of his contract, so it's either Chelsea sell him this summer, let his contract run down until next summer, and then he goes for free. So it's a really interesting time for Conor Gallagher. He's always made clear that he wants to stay at Chelsea. This is his club. He's been at the club since he was a boy, and he wants to stay, but we'll await to see what happens with that one. Dan, selling young academy products that have been at Chelsea since they were kids has been an ongoing theme under this ownership, hasn't it? Yeah,
and it's been a theme for Chelsea for a number of years, even before Todd Bowley's team came in. It's something that, as fans, really you want to see homegrown academy players make it into your first team. And the way that PSR is at the moment, that isn't what's happening for Premier League clubs, and you've seen many Premier League clubs have to offload homegrown players. We start here, you know, Mason Mount, that will have been one that really, really smarted. There's 2 Chelsea fans sat at that table there who were very upset when Mason Mount made the move to Manchester United. And it's kind of a similar vibe now with Conor Gallagher. Conor Gallagher almost stepped into Mason Mount's shoes of being that homegrown product in the midfield, someone that the Chelsea fans could really relate to and get on board with. Similar vibe, Mount leaving to Manchester United and Gallagher potentially leaving as well. You've got 2 players who've left there, Livramento and Lewis Hall, who've gone to Newcastle. Arguably, Newcastle and Chelsea are kind of competing in the same area of the Premier League at the moment. So to lose 2 players of them who could potentially go on and have big careers at Newcastle, again, I just don't think it's something that fans of Chelsea would really be keen on and want to see. Loftus-Cheek, a different proposition. He'd been at Chelsea a while, had various loans, a very, very good footballer, but probably never cemented himself in Chelsea's midfield. He's gone off to Milan and made a success of himself. Hudson-Odoi was miles off the first team as well. Reinvented himself kind of at Nottingham Forest last season, and I'm sure he'll go on and have a very good season again this time round. Ian Maatson, the most recent academy graduate that's gone and joined Aston Villa. again, in an ideal world, I don't really feel like Chelsea and Chelsea fans would want to lose this player. He's had a successful loan at Dortmund, named left-back of the tournament in the Champions League. But for PSR reasons, Chelsea have felt obliged to sell him, and Villa have kind of took that on and sold a player the other way, and it appeases PSR. But it's just not right. And there's, arguably, some of these players would make Chelsea a better team now. Previous centre-backs that have left, the likes of Tomori and Gahey, I think they probably get in Chelsea's team if they're there now. So really, Chelsea will say that they're kind of forced to do it, but because of PSR, but because it's been such an extreme transfer policy under Todd Bowley, Chelsea fans lose out on watching what is one of the most pure things that you can watch as a Premier League fan or as a football fan. Young academy players making it to your first team, and I'm sure Conor Gallagher, unfortunately, I don't think he'll be the last.
Faku, how do you feel? When you look at some of those names and some of the names that Dan mentioned as well, you think of Tomori, Gahey, Tammy Abraham, all of those players, there's going to be really no academy products left at Chelsea. If you think of Trevor Chalobah wasn't taken on their pre-season tour of America, Armando Broja we've spoken about, that he's been linked away. There's going to be none left, is there?
The only person left is Reece James, who's perpetually injured. Obviously, he's Chelsea's captain right now, and obviously we hope for this season that he stays fit. But it's a shame if you're a Chelsea fan to see all these academy products leave and go and achieve huge things. You think of Ian Maatsen, a player that you're going to see a lot this season, who played in the Champions League, was in the Champions League team this season, and was an integral player for Borussia Dortmund. And he was great in the Championship for Burnley as well. And so the fact that these academy products aren't being utilised and being used as make-weights to balance the books is a shame. But we're seeing it across loads of top clubs this season. We're seeing it across Manchester United, at Arsenal. It's just how football's going with the current financial regulations. But for Chelsea, they seem to do it more than any other team, and it's a shame because these players, like Dan mentioned, are good enough to start for Chelsea. Mark Gurley started for England. Guy Tomori's a great player. These players would make Chelsea better, but for some reason, the ownership group decided to let them go. So we just have to see how it plays out.
It will be interesting, to say the least. Right, next up, we've got updates on Mikel, Merino, Eddie Nketiah, Wan-Bissaka, and much more. Welcome back. There's loads happening at Arsenal. Emile Smith-Rowe is on his way out. We're expecting an announcement of his departure to Fulham very soon. This was him leaving his medical yesterday ahead of a deal totalling £34 million with add-ons. It would be a club record for Fulham. Well, as for incomings, Arsenal explored the conditions of a potential deal for Real Sociedad midfielder Mikel Merino, but have yet to decide whether to pursue a move. Merino has entered into the final year of his contract at Real Sociedad. Dan, if Arsenal do make this move, do you see him coming in and starting straight away?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of Premier League fans will remember Mikel Merino for his time at Newcastle United. It was a very short and sweet spell. He only made 17 appearances in that season. But I think a lot of fans would have seen him at the Euros in the summer, where he played really well for Spain. He didn't necessarily start many games. He came off the bench in each of the 7. But a lot of us would have seen that goal, that 119th minute winner against Germany that got Spain to the semi-finals and was huge in them winning the whole thing. I think in terms for Arsenal, we know that they have options in midfield. We know Thomas Partey, Declan Rice, Jorginho as well. I think when you look at Partey and Jorginho, you have to look at their ages now. You know, they're mid-30s. And also the emergence of Declan Rice being not just a defensive midfielder anymore. We saw that in the second half of last season, that he has many more skills and abilities than just those defensive ones. And we saw him becoming a marauding number 8, didn't we? And I think with Moreno, I'm not sure he'll necessarily start if this move happens, but what he does offer Arsenal is some strength and depth, and he can play a variety of positions, whether it's number 6 and sitting or notching a few goals and going further forward.
Yeah, he's a player that's immensely talented and helps Arsenal with ball retention as well. Like you say, I'm not too sure if he starts for this Arsenal side, but he's a great option. And we live in a Pep Guardiola world, right? And Arsenal's building their squad similar to how Pep Guardiola does. They brought in Kovacic, Man City, last summer when people probably thought they didn't need that reinforcement, but there was parts of last season when Kovacic came to the fore for City, and Arsenal were just building the squad from a position of strength. And Moreno will have a part to play, especially if Arsenal to compete in all competitions like they want to. And we've mentioned it so many times, it's not Premier League or bust for Arsenal, but they have to start winning major trophies, and I think this contributes to it. He has got 1 year left in his deal, and you called it opportunistic before. Real Sociedad are keen to keep this player. Their director came out and said that they're trying to re-sign him to a longer deal because he was so integral for them last season. And like you mentioned, he was good for Spain in the Euros as well. So he's a player in high demand. He's a player that we've already seen in the Premier League as well at Newcastle. So he ticks all the boxes for Arsenal. It's whether they can get the deal done.
Yeah, it feels very much in the mould of when they got Trossard in, when they got Jorginho in, spying an opportunity and kind of moving away from their main transfer policy to get those players in. So I think he'd be a tremendous signing for Arsenal, a great addition to the squad. I'm quite surprised Man City aren't having a look at him. I've got to be honest, it's very well known that they need someone who can cover Rodri or play with him. Moreno strikes me as that type of player. Can play as a 6, can play as an 8, can play as a double pivot as well. I'm just surprised that Manchester City, if they're looking to reinforce that area, that someone who you would think would be relatively cheap with a year left on his contract, international footballer, got huge pedigree. I'm surprised Manchester City aren't looking at him, I've got to be honest.
Yeah.
Marseille have returned with an improved offer worth in the region of £17 million for Arsenal forward Eddie Nketiah. It's understood Marseille's package is closer to Arsenal's valuation and payment structure. Talks are ongoing, with all parties cautiously optimistic an agreement can be struck. Dan, is it finally time for Nketiah to move on?
Yeah, I think as the season went on, it was apparent he didn't really have a future at Arsenal. His minutes got less as the season went on. He started the season quite well, scored that hat-trick. I think we're seeing the footage there of when he scored a hat-trick earlier on in the season, but then never really got himself in the team as a regular starter, and actually his bench minutes dwindled as well. So I think it's the right time for him to make the move. I think players are very keen to go and play for Roberto De Zerbi. He's at Marseille now. Marseille are throwing a little bit of money at it. I think Eddie Nketiah will probably be looking at this move and thinking, if I can go to France for a couple of years, score some goals, maybe I've got a chance of coming back and getting another high-level Premier League move and getting towards the upper echelons of the Premier League again. I think if he was to move in the Premier League now, I'm not sure where he would go other than a newly promoted side. I'm surprised newly promoted sides haven't really had a look at him, because Ipswich, for example, I think he guarantees goals more than Delap. Probably it's a similar fee as well for what they're paid for Delap. So I'm surprised at that, but Kieran McKenna's obviously building the way he wants to build. At Ipswich, when I was looking at Nketiah earlier, I was surprised to learn he's 25. You know, he's one of those players that you just associate with being a young player. Feels but actually he's been around for a while and has never really managed to get into that Arsenal first team, which there's no real criticism of that. Arsenal are a brilliant club that are just improving year on, year out, and he's probably a bit like Smith Rowe, being left behind as Arsenal have improved. So, yeah, I think go away, get a move, play some football, and then maybe come back to the Premier League in a couple of years. I think that's how he'll be looking at it.
Also, if he has ambitions to play for England, he can look at players like Ollie Watkins, look at players like Ivan Toney, who broke into England later on in their careers. And if he wants to play, he has to go and play regular first-team football. He scored so many goals for the under-21s. And, yeah, he hasn't declared for Ghana yet. He's got the option to play for the Ghana national team. So he's clearly got ambitions to still play international football for England. Go away to a team where he can get first-team football, go abroad where a lot of players from England have gone and made their name, and then come back in a couple of years' time if that's what you desire. But I agree with you. In terms of the fee, it's relatively cheap for a player that has scored a lot of goals in the Premier League.
Yeah, fees are obviously very, very high nowadays, and for a player who's still got a fair amount of time on his contract, an English striker classed as a goal scorer, I'm surprised at that fee. But Arsenal fans, it's probably one criticism they've had of the club over the years is that they've not been brilliant sellers, and I've seen that a few are upset about this fee actually as well.
What else, Kwaku, then do Arsenal need? We've spoken about Merino coming in, obviously Smith Rowe and Nketiah potentially going the other way. Is there anything else you think that stands out, a position that stands out that Arsenal need?
Well, it's difficult for Arsenal because they broke the record for the amount of goals that Arsenal scored in the Premier League last season in 91. They only conceded 29 goals last year, which is the least in the Premier League. But they need that out-and-out striker. If they let Eddie Nketiah go, I think they need that striker to take him over the edge. It's whether that striker's out there. We've discussed it before. But for me, there's only a few teams that have won this Premier League. Maybe Chelsea in 04, 05, 05, 06, and City a couple of years ago before they brought in Erling Haaland, that have won the league without a prolific goal scorer. We know what Saka can contribute. Martinelli, obviously, last year suffered with injuries and therefore his contributions decreased. But I think Arsenal need that man who can go and get them 20 Premier League goals, because there are some games where Arsenal don't play well and need someone to get them out of jail. And when Aston Villa played against Arsenal, Ollie Watkins took his chance. If Arsenal had a striker like that who could guarantee them goals in big games, then maybe that could push them over the edge, because that's what you need to win major trophies. You need those big-time players to get those big-time goals to win those big-time trophies. So for Arsenal, it's going to get that goal scorer, but the market is such. We talked about Victor Osimhen going to Chelsea and not many teams looking at him. For Arsenal, it's about getting that right man, because we know how expensive strikers can be in this market.
Yeah, it's always difficult, isn't it? Strikers on the market. Right, to West Ham now, and they're close to agreeing a deal with Manchester United for the signing of right-back Aaron Wan-Bissaka. We spoke on Good Morning Transfers, Dan, about, does he suit West Ham and sort of the West Ham perspective, but how much do you feel like Aaron Wan-Bissaka needs this personally? I think we're all sort of forgetting why he even got that move to Manchester United in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, remember his nickname was Spider, right? I mean, he had a great story at Crystal Palace, coming through the academy there, the story about him being previously a winger, and Wilfried Zaha calling him, one of the best one-on-one defenders he's ever faced. And I think Aaron Wan-Bissaka was very good at Manchester United for those first few seasons. I think maybe frustrations from fans or those who follow Manchester United was perhaps the lack of development going forward. But I think this move, though, for Wan-Bissaka is very positive. He's still only 26, having had 5 years at Manchester United. So he'll bring a lot of experience, European experience, to that changing room at West Ham. And I also think him as an option at right back, you mentioned it earlier, they've obviously lost Ben Johnson as well to Ipswich, going on a free contract after his contract expired. And Koufal is now 31 years old. So Wan-Bissaka will play a lot. But I also think, his relationship with Jared Bowen on that right-hand side, if this move happens, can really unlock Bowen in terms of leave him and let him do his attacking work. Maybe he doesn't have to track back as much, because Wan-Bissaka can pretty much deal with anyone, really, one-on-one defending. So I think for Wan-Bissaka, it's really positive. And for Julian Lopetegui, he's slowly but surely rebuilding that defence, which, as you mentioned a bit earlier, was quite leaky last season.
Yeah, well, West Ham are advancing on a deal for Borussia Dortmund forward Nicholas Füllkrug. There is still work to do on the structure of the fee and elements of the personal terms, but there is now a growing feeling that that deal can be struck. I mean, Dan, like we said earlier, we've been sat here. Is this finally the last transfer window that we stop talking about West Ham finally needing a striker?
Probably not, because Füllkrug is 32. I believe West Ham seem to be collecting ageing goal scorers at the moment. Obviously, Mikel Antonio is there in his 30s. Danny Ings is in his 30s, and they're looking to add Füllkrug to the mix as well, who's 32. So at some point in the next few years, I imagine we'll be talking about West Ham still needing a striker. I find this move a little bit surprising, just in terms of his profile in Germany now. He's a real success story of the last few years. The Dortmund fans love him. Every German football fan seems to love him. So he's really become a bit of a household name in Germany in the Bundesliga now. So to move to the Premier League at this time would be a surprise. Dan mentioned earlier that Lopetegui has worked previously with ageing forwards. He kind of likes to have a facilitator in the number 9 position, and then the more creative and attacking players, pacey players, kind of work around that player in that system. So it appears that he's looking to do that again, Lopetegui. But West Ham played Bowen up front at times last season, and that worked well. He scored goals, but Lopetegui's looking at rebuilding that defence. Maybe he just wants his own centre forward as well. But West Ham have tried so many times to replace Antonio, and he's always ended up getting his place back in the team. You think of Scamacca, you think of Sebastian Haller, players that have been good elsewhere but didn't quite make it at West Ham. Probably, 10, 11 games into the season, we'll probably still be seeing Mikel Antonio lead the line.
Will we? We'll have to wait and see, won't we? Right, next up, no signings at Liverpool yet. Is there cause for concern? We'll assess that in a few minutes.
Welcome back. Just under a month to go until the transfer window closes, and we're just having a look at the spending across the Premier League during this summer window. As you can see here, Aston Villa, the biggest spenders so far. They've been very busy in the window. Ian Maatsen, their big money signing, £44.5 million, almost £130 in total. Manchester United, they've been busy, of course, as well. The likes of Lenny Yoro and Joshua Zirkzee, their big money signings. For Chelsea, a lot of that money, the £86.7 million, 30 million of that went on Kiernan Dewsbury Hall. Dan spoke about it a bit earlier, but Ipswich, they've made 5 signings this window under Kieran McKenna. They're looking, of course, to stay away from relegation. We'll see if they can do that. West Ham, only a few signings, but Maximilian Kilman, their big signing at £40 million. And as you go down the league, quite a few clubs have all made signings, really. You'll see there Fulham on 0, but as we've been reporting, Emil Smith-Rowe, the announcement there from Arsenal is expected to be very soon. But perhaps most telling is Liverpool, the only ones of perhaps the classic top 6 who are still on 0. I suppose the question that I have to all my friends on the panel is, are we worried about Liverpool?
Yeah, I think that Liverpool are a team that have always lived within their means, right? But I think they're a team that also have to go again. There's a new era here. Arne Slot's a new manager, and with any new manager that comes into a team, they need to bring in their own type of players. What he did do when he was managing the finals was also operate within limited resources. But Liverpool not spending that much money is worrying. If you're a Liverpool fan going into this new season, I know that they finished 3rd last season. They had a decent season under Klopp in his last year. But I think this is a Liverpool team that have got Van Dijk in his last year of his contract, Trent Alexander-Arnold in the last year of his contract, Mo Salah in his last year of his contract. Yeah. And so they're a team that it's up in flux, or it's in flux at the moment. And I feel like Liverpool fans will be very worried that the club has not spent any money this summer.
Dan, how do you feel about this? Kwaku saying, it's potential to be a little bit worried about Liverpool. Where do you sit? Do you think there's any cause for concern that they haven't signed anyone yet?
I don't think Liverpool fans will be massively concerned, to be honest. I think they're pretty well stocked everywhere. It's not like anyone's left and you think, oh God, they need replaced. I don't think there's anything that's urgent for Liverpool. I would expect that 0 to change, but by the end of August, I think there's one position maybe they look a little bit weak. You would say probably number 6. Maybe they need someone to anchor their midfield. But I think what Slot's walked into is a very harmonious dressing room, a squad that's in a good place. Because of injuries last season, a lot of young academy players had to come in and play football. Some of them even had to come in and play in a cup final environment. So a lot of those young players will have garnered a lot of experience from what happened to them. Like last season, Liverpool were in the title race pretty much the entire, about 75% of the season. Liverpool were in the title race. At one point, they were setting the pace, I believe, as well. I think the most important thing for Liverpool at the moment is they've got a manager now. So a change in manager after 8.5 years. He's going to come in with some fresh ideas. There'll be some off-the-ball stuff that I think will be virtually the same as Klopp. It's on the ball where things are going to change for Liverpool. They're going to be a little bit more methodical, a little bit more possession-based than they were under Klopp. I think Slot will look at what he's got in that dressing room and look at what he has on that training pitch. Some great young players like Quansah, Bradley coming through and others. He'll think, I've got a lot of players there that are quite malleable, a lot of players that maybe, they're not bedded into what Jurgen Klopp has done. I can bring those fresh young players into this environment and get them playing the way that I want. You facilitate that with a lot of the great players that Liverpool have. I take on board that, yes, the contract situations for those 3 are alarming. I'm sure Liverpool will sort that out the way that they want to sort it out. There's been a lot of churn above management level at Liverpool as well. Michael Edwards coming back, Richard Hughes from Bournemouth. So everyone's kind of finding their feet and everyone's coming in together at the same time. But Liverpool are in a good place. If I was a Liverpool fan, I don't think I'd be worried still.
But obviously we're not privy to Liverpool's finances completely, but one of the craziest days of the transfer window last summer was when we thought Caicedo was going to go to Liverpool instead of Chelsea, ended up going to Chelsea. Jurgen Klopp came out and talked about Caicedo in a press conference because he thought the deal was done. They were going to bid over £100 million. That money should still be there, right? So if you're a Liverpool fan, it's not a case that we haven't got the resources. Also lost a big contract in Thiago, who no longer plays. He's retired from football. So the money is there to spend. It's about going out and spending it. And Liverpool need to do that to compete with the likes of Arsenal and Man City, who are spending money. Manchester United are going in the right direction. Chelsea are always going to spend money. And I know Liverpool in recent years have lived within their means, but it's time to go again because Arne slot's going to need all the support he can get because it's a new league. He hasn't managed here before. There's big egos in the dressing room. So to bring in some players that he knows, the same way that Man United did for Eric Ten Hag, of course it didn't work to the same extent that it's worked at other clubs, but I think that they need to back him in the transfer window for sure.
Perfect. Right, coming up, the Scottish Premiership gets underway this weekend, and we'll be speaking live to Celtic boss Brendan Rodgers very shortly. Russell Martin received an honorary degree from the University of Brighton in recognition of his work to improve the lives of young people. The Southampton manager has already been busy in the transfer market, and he said a decision is yet to be made on Kyle Walker-Peters' future at the club.
Yeah, we have lots of interest in him, as we did last summer, and then Kyle ended up staying, maybe to the surprise of everyone, myself included, and he was amazing for us last season. He did incredibly well. He's a supremely talented person. And with a year left on his contract, obviously there's a big decision to make soon. If someone comes in and meets the club's valuation, then maybe it's time best for everyone that Kyle goes and plays elsewhere. And if not, I hope that we have the same Kyle last year in terms of attitude and application, and he can really help us.
Well, let's update you now on some other deals. Ipswich remain in talks with Blackburn Rovers over the signing of Sammy Szmodics. Ipswich are optimistic they can strike an agreement. And this is a guy, we know goal scoring is the hardest thing in football, let alone when you're a promoted club coming up to the Premier League. And they are getting, if they do get Sammy Szmodic, someone who scored a ridiculous amount of goals in the Championship last season, Dan.
Yeah, a little bit of a late bloomer. I think he scored 27 goals for Blackburn last season. Really, in his career, he hadn't had a season like that previously. I think he spent some time at Peterborough as well. But a really great season in a Blackburn team that didn't really pull up any trees in the Championship. So his stock is high in terms of the EFL at the moment. I think when a team gets promoted, I think you're right, they probably need a little bit more variety in terms of their attacking options than the team that's established in the Premier League, because quite simply they don't know how players are going to handle that step up, and Ipswich will have a lot of players where they're not sure whether they're going to be able to step up to the Premier League or not, because they've not played in the Premier League before. They've already signed Liam Delap for relatively big money, which is it's a risk because he's not really played in the Premier League before. But I always think the teams that do well when they come up, they have that consistency of, the bulk of the team is the team that was with them in the Championship. And Ipswich, obviously, were in League One not that long ago as well. But if you can pick off the best talent from the Championship as well, there's a lot of talent in the Championship. I'm surprised teams don't raid the EFL more often, because some tremendous players have been picked up over the years from the Championship. They've got Amari Hutchinson back. They've signed him permanently as well. Ipswich, they were after Philogene, who ended up going to Villa. So I just think targeting players that have been high-level players in the Championship, I do think that's a good transfer strategy for Ipswich. Quaker obviously doesn't, though.
I don't know. They've signed very well. The player that's signed the most Premier League experience is Ben Johnson, who was in and out of the West Ham side. They need some players who've been there and done it before in the Premier League. I know they had a band of brothers last season. It was a team that was operating on goodwill and great play and great management from Kieran McKenna, but I would like to see them sign some more experienced players. I think Smodge should be good, but I want to see them sign some players who've done it in the Premier League, because we saw how difficult it was for promoted sides last season. Yeah. And in January, they went and signed some more proven players to try and stave off relegation fears, and it didn't work. It was too little too late.
I think Ipswich are in the best place of the three that have come up, bizarrely, considering Leicester won the league. I actually think Ipswich are better placed than them at the moment in terms of sustainability in the Premier League. Ipswich remind me a little bit of that Swansea side that came up under Brendan Rodgers. I think there's a lot of parallels that can be drawn, and if you look at that Swansea team, they didn't reinvent the wheel from the team that got them up. They had their style, they had their beliefs, they had their tactical framework, and I just think Ipswich are doing things in the right way. I'd back them to have a good season at the moment, and Szmodic would add to that.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Pascal Gross has arrived in Dortmund ahead of completing a medical and formalities of his £8 million move to Borussia Dortmund, one of Brighton's best and most consistent players. Are you surprised by this move?
Not just one of Brighton's best players, one of the best players in the Premier League last season and one of the most underrated players. I am very surprised, because for Brighton, I don't know how long you can go by selling your best players year after year after year. Obviously, McAllister went last season, Caicedo went last season. They've now lost Pascal Gross, who was their best player last season. Billy Gilmore's linked with a move away to Napoli. And we saw it with Southampton. We saw it in kind with Leicester as well. You can't keep losing your best players year after year, because otherwise you're going to start to struggle in the Premier League. Pascal Gross, of course, it's a dream move for him going to Borussia Dortmund. He's a player that has bloomed later on in his career, and for Brighton, seeing them up close and personal a few times last season just drops into different spaces. If you remember what Toni Kroos did for Germany during the Euros, Pascal Gross does a similar thing for Brighton, but he can just pop up in more spaces and in advanced positions as well. I really like what he brings to the Brighton side, so it's going to be a huge miss. And it's what they do to replace him. They've already spent, like Dan pointed out, a lot of money already. Whether they have to go in again to replace Pascal Gross remains to be seen, but I think it's going to be a huge loss for a club that last season underachieved and lost their manager as well in the summer.
Yeah, they did. Brighton are sort of always a club that we feel like are usually OK in those situations. I know it didn't go to plan for them last season, but it isn't ideal for their new manager that's just come in. When you've lost Adam Lallana as well, you've lost someone that can play in about 8 different positions on the pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the important point there is as well, it's not just Pascal Gross, one of the best players, as you mentioned, last season in the Premier League. It's the experience he brings to that Brighton team. As you mentioned, Olivia, the fact he can play multiple positions, but very well as well. Whether we've seen him at right wing-back, midfield, he pops up with such important goals for Brighton. And as you mentioned, for a new manager with what is relatively quite a young team, you just think they might lose that bit of leadership and experience in the changing room potentially. But I'm sure the new manager has some plans in place, and we'll see if they tend to replace
older
him.
than the manager, isn't he?
That's very true.
Right, well, Wolves are not interested in letting Hugo Bueno go at this stage. It's understood Celtic are a number of clubs who have approached Wolves to take the left-back on loan this summer. Obviously, they've already lost Maximilian Kilman, another defender. You can see why Wolves wouldn't want to let him go, wouldn't you, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Hugo Bueno is a very interesting player for Wolves. You know, he came through the academy, really broke through under Julian Lopetegui actually a few seasons ago. Last season he had a few injuries and wasn't able to really do much. But basically the story is Wolves aren't interested in letting him go on loan, and they've done a lot of good business already early in the window. So keep it quietly. But I think under Gary O'Neill they're having a very good window. But whisper it.
Whisper it quietly. Right, let's get to the Scottish Premiership now as Celtic begin their defence of their title this weekend. Let's cross line to Luke Shanley, who's with Brendan Rodgers. Luke, over to you.
Yeah, and it's one of 4 live games on Sky Sports in the Scottish Premiership this week for the big kick-off, and Brendan Rodgers is here in beautiful Lennoxtown, great conditions. Brendan, firstly on pre-season, how's it been so far?
It's been very good. The players, staff, everyone's been outstanding. Back off a really good tour and the players shaping up very well.
Yeah, good results against Manchester City and Chelsea. Can you read into that? Can you use that to build some momentum so early on?
Yeah, I think because you still have to perform. You're playing against really good players, and my experience of top clubs, no top club even wants to lose a pre-season game. So for us, DC United, we played very well. And obviously into Man City and Chelsea, and of course there's no trophies handed out in pre-season, but it's always a nice little marker.
Geez, for that was Luke Shanley with Brendan Rodgers. We'll try and get it back, but we're not sure if we're going to be able to. For the time being, let's get to Everton, who have signed Jake O'Brien from Lyon. Kwaku, what sort of player are Everton getting? Because he's slightly unknown, isn't he?
Unheralded when he left Palace and joined Lyon in the summer last season. Started the first 6 games on the bench and then broke into the team, was an ever-present. He's imposing, 6'6", centre-back, Republic of Ireland national as well. He's a player that now he's very, very highly touted, but like I mentioned, when he joined Lyon, wasn't so. And I expect Sean Dyche to really utilise his skill set. Obviously, he's imposing in both boxes. He chipped in a few goals as well last season for Lyon. And was one of their most consistent performers towards the back end of the season. So I expect him to settle into the Premier League very well, and I expect him to be one of Everton's key players. And this is a sign of Everton moving in the right direction. This is a really, really good sign and positive as well. This is Everton operating on the front foot. What he might need to work on is his ability with the ball at his feet, but that will come in time. He's still very, very young. But with a manager like Sean Dyche, who likes big, imposing, physical defenders, I expect him to be a success in the Premier League next season.
It's quite a lot of money, though, isn't it, Dan?
Yeah, look, he's a huge profit from when he left Crystal Palace, that's for sure. He says himself, a quote here, "I'm a ball-playing centre-half, fast. I like to attack in both boxes and I like to bring a bit of excitement." Not sure Sean Dyche will want the excitement from a defensive point of view, but I'm sure he'll like some excitement in front of goal. It's hard to see where he fits in at the moment because Everton had a really brilliant defence last season. Tarkowski and Branthwaite playing at centre-back together, Pickford behind them. They didn't ship many goals. I think Everton are having an absolutely brilliant window so far. They've improved in attacking positions. OK, they've lost Amadou Onana to Villa, but I think out of the 2 big losses that they could have had, I think Everton fans will think that's a more acceptable loss. It's the lesser of 2 evils, because holding on to Branthwaite is massive, and I think they will hold on to him. And I think also that's the right thing for the player. Too many players jump ship too early. Branthwaite's had 1 full season in the Premier League, albeit an absolutely brilliant season. If he goes to Manchester United, there's a chance he almost gets lost in their plethora of centre-halves. Lisandro Martinez, when he's fit, he's left-sided centre-back. That's where Branthwaite plays. So I think for him, it's great for him to stay at Everton for another season. Everton to build on those solid foundations that they had, and I think they're having a really good window.
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth, because Jared Branthwaite has been the subject of bids from Manchester United. Speaking after Everton's pre-season win over Coventry, manager Sean Dyche denied O'Brien's arrival is linked to the future of Branthwaite.
Put 2 and 2 together at Everton Football Club? No way. You're kidding me. I'm very surprised that people put 2 and 2 together at Everton Football Club. What I would suggest is it's nothing to do with that. You know, it's just to do with the modelling and trying to model the club. with the finances available, trying to bring players that can add the layers to the club. Obviously, we're stretched at the moment with the depth of the club, if you like, and younger style of players who can develop and protect the club both on the pitch with their performances and then in the future with the finances. It's a tough juggling act and tough to find the players who can do that. But we think we've got a few here now.
Obviously, I have to ask you then, how confident are you that Jared will be with you throughout the whole season?
Yeah, I mean, we made it clear to him that there was nothing other than that. But as you said, 2 and 2 together and everyone starts speculating, and what do you do?
That was Sean Dyche speaking about Jared Branthwaite's future. Dan has said that he thinks it would be better if he stayed at Everton. Dan, he was unfortunate not to make the final squad for the Euros this summer. What makes him so good?
I think we just have to look at his last 12 months. He was part of Lee Carsley's England side that won the Euros. He made 35 appearances in the Premier League in his first season. And let's not forget, Everton had the 4th best defence in the Premier League last season, and he was obviously a very big part of that. So I think the fact he was able to outdo Michael Keane, play with James Tarkowski, was very impressive. And as Sean Dyche said, at the moment, he's going nowhere.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time for Everton and Jared Branthwaite, but they have had a very, very good transfer window so far. Dan, Kwaku, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. We'll be back. Transfer Talk the same time tomorrow. Coming up, we are going live to Paris after 2 more gold medals for Team GB at the Olympics.